Hare Krishna. Thank you for inviting me to attempt to say some words in understanding the Srimad Bhagavatam and in glorifying how Srila Prabhupada's voice presented this to the world. Excuse me. Om Gyan Timnandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshusun Militanyena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Manjakalparubhischa Kripasinduvevacha Patitanan Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivas Adi Gaur Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We are reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto, Chapter 8, titled Manifestation of Brahma from Vishnu. You chant the Sanskrit words, for which verse? They have 3 verses, I think they want me. So I'll read 16 and 17, and then we will all chant for 18. Okay, thank you. Okay. I'm just going to read the English to the text that you read, I'm thinking, yesterday. Into that universal lotus flower, Lord Vishnu personally entered as the super soul. And when it was thus impregnated with all the modes of material nature, the personality of Vedic wisdom, whom we call the self-born, was generated. So naturally, I wasn't here for the class yesterday. Naturally, this concept of impregnation without an embodied mother and father is inconceivable to us. And what we are reading in Srimad Bhagavatam is described as inconceivable to everyone who inhabits this universe, from the highest position down to the lowest. We're hearing descriptions of infinite, inconceivable characteristics, pastimes, and potencies of the Supreme, of the unlimited Supreme. Text 16, Tasyam Sachamba Karnikhayam Avashtito Lokam Apashyamana Harikraman Vyomni Vibrita Netras Chatvarhi Lebhe Nutisham Mukhani. Translation: Brahma, born out of the lotus flower, could not see the world, although he was situated in the world, W-H-O-R-L. He therefore circumambulated all of space, and while moving his eyes in all directions, he achieved 4 heads in terms of the 4 directions. So I'll just say briefly that every material body is meant to accommodate the living entity in terms of his consciousness, his desires, his past, and also what opportunity the material nature and Krishna through his material nature is giving that living entity in order to understand and progress through life. So while this is inconceivable to us, that Brahma is looking at the entire universe in such a way that the body manifests into 4 different heads facing the 4 directions. Prabhupada once said, as to our understanding of even our own body, none of us can explain how even our nails grow. You cut them, how do they grow back? When you cut your hair, how does that grow back? No one can actually truly intuitively grasp and understand that. The material body accommodates and is fitted around the living being, his consciousness, his desires, his karma, and so on. How do we explain that with the very first living being within the universe? Only through studying the Srimad Bhagavatam can we understand that the souls who are now inhabiting this universe, Prabhupada once described as, since time immemorial, have been conditioned souls. And we will read in Bhagavatam that the universe itself is created, how it's created. It is maintained, how it is maintained. And then there is dissolution of the universe. Where do all the souls go? And then it is created again in endless cycles. When did we first come into this? How many universes have we lived in and acted out to not have gone back to our home, back to Godhead? And by the time the universe is dissolved, we're placed in a dormant condition only to begin again in the next universe. This is no amount of brain power can grasp this, what appears to us to be an infinity of time. So here we're describing Brahma, the very first being in the new universe. Okay, text 17. Tasmad Yuganta Svasanava Guna Jalorami Chakrat Salidad Virudam Upashrita Kanyam Ulokatatvam Natmanam Adhavidad Adideva. Lord Brahma, situated in that lotus, could not perfectly understand the creation, the lotus, or himself. At the end of the millennium, the air of devastation began to move the water and the lotus in great circular waves. Purport by Srila Prabhupada, Lord Brahma was perplexed about his creation, the lotus, and the world. even though he tried to understand them for 1 millennium, which itself is beyond calculation in the solar years of human beings. No one, therefore, can know the mystery of the creation and cosmic manifestation simply by mental speculation. The human being is so limited in his capacity that without the help of the Supreme, he can hardly understand the mystery of the will of the Lord in terms of creation, continuance, and destruction. So, text 18 we can chant together. Ka Esha Ya. I'm sorry, the Sanskrit is Yo Asho Aham Abja Prishte Etat Kuta Va Abjam Ananyat Apsu Asti Hi Adhastat Iha Kinchana Etat Adhishtitam Yatra Sata Nu Bhavyam Kaesha Yosav Aham Abja Prishta Tat Kuto Vabjam Ananyarapsu Asti Hyadastad Iha Kinchanati. Let me say that again. Asti Hyadastad Iha Kinchanaitad Adhishtitam Yatra Satanubhavyam Kaesha Yosav Aham Abja Prishta Etat Kuto Bhabjam Ananyadapsu Hasti Hyad Hastad Iha Kinchanaitad Adhishtitam Yatra Satanubhavyam Esha Yosav Aham Abja Prishta Etat Kuto Bhabjam Ananyadapsu Astiya Adhishtitam Yatra Satanubhavyam Esha Yosav Aham Abja Prishta Etat Kuto Bhabjam Ananyadapsu Asti Hi Ashtad Iha Kinchanaitad Adhishtitam Yatra Satanubhavyam Yesha Yosav Aham Abja Prishta Etat Ananyadapsu Asti Hi Adhishtitam Yatra Satanubhavyam. Transliteration word meanings. Kaha, who? Esha, this. Ya aso aham, that I am. So we can begin to feel the question, who? What is this that I am? Abhya prishte, on top of the lotus. Etat, this. Kutaha, is the next question. Where from? Imagine being the first person trying to understand, where is this? Who am I? What am I doing here? And where's all this from? Ba, either. Abjam, lotus flower. Ananyat, otherwise. Apsu, in the water. Asti, there is. He, certainly. Adhastat, from below. So he's seeing something that no one can see. He's seeing that half this universe is filled with water. We can't see that. And he's looking at this lotus and saying, seems to be coming. He doesn't see the Lord yet. He just sees the stem of this lotus coming out of the water. He's asking, this is in the water from below. How is it? Where is this coming from? Iha, in this. Kinchana, anything. Etat, this. Atishtitam, situated. Yatra, wherein. Sata, automatically. New, or not. Bhavyam, must be. So he sees himself in the whirl of this. We cannot imagine what the stem of this lotus is. That it contains all material energies, which will be ultimately manifest as stars, planets, space, every element within the universe. It's all in this. And he's asking, how am I situated in this? So we can just ponder that we as embodied humans, especially in our youth, it was natural to ask questions relative to ourselves. We understood where I came from, where we came from a mother and a father, but is that all there is? Why am I even here? I mean, the natural questions that any thinking person asks. Why does time make this body age? Why are there ailments and diseases? Why is there pain? Eventually, why is there any death? It seems unnatural that we're in pain if there's a God. It seems unnatural that we're getting old and our body faculties are diminishing. And it certainly seems unnatural for the living being, the life force, to go through an experience that we call death. It's unnatural for the living entity who does not die. Of course, the youth doesn't know that, but it's just a feeling, an instinct. This is unnatural. And thus, the whole struggle of existence to try to not be under the stringent laws of nature begins. life after life. The unnatural conditions, everyone is struggling to hold back, to avoid, to prevent, and no one can overcome the material nature. Even today, we hear people of great wealth, they dream of how they're going to take some essence of their body and prolong it, freeze it, so that in some imaginary future, they'll be revived again. Everyone from the most wealthy, powerful, to the lowest, even insect, they're just, according to their capacity or intelligence or lack of, they're struggling against the laws of nature. And as we study the creation, we're going to answer the ultimate paradox. If there is a loving God, why do these conditions exist? What is the real purpose of life in the universe? Because otherwise, not understanding purpose, everyone's just struggling in a battle they can never win. So, is there purpose greater than that? That is why we study in the Srimad Bhagavatam creation. Because we're learning that this creation does have purpose. Let me read the translation and purport. Lord Brahma, in his ignorance, I don't even know how to use that word in relation to Lord Brahma. If you think of his lifetime compared to ours, what is his lifetime? Trillion? I don't even know the number. Trillions, quadrillions of years of our years. So, relatively speaking, that is the difference between his intelligence and ours. The same magnitude of lifespan that he has compared to us, that same magnitude of intelligence he has compared to us. So I'm struck by it says Lord Brahma in his ignorance. I can't even imagine what that means. We can't contemplate someone being 1,000 times more intelligent than any of us. 100,000 times. Our mind can't project and contain such a thought. But the celestial devas, again, as you look at their lifespan, that's the magnitude of their brain compared to ours. You know, in the original first 3 volumes of the Srimad Bhagavatam that Prabhupada brought with him to the West, each one had a different preface and introduction. Later, someone decided to standardize it to have the same, but it's the same canto, to have the same preface and introduction in each volume. But originally, they were unique. And if you ever have an opportunity to look at an original printing of, or an original actual Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, volume 2, in that prologue, Prabhupada writes, it tells an anecdotal story about how a friend of his, a brahminical friend of his, observing Prabhupada's endeavor to study and translate and write, asked our Srila Prabhupada, what are you working on? And Prabhupada described to him, I am working on presenting the science of God in 60 volumes. His friend, this is right out of Prabhupada's intro to volume 2 of the first canto. Prabhupada writes that his friend was astonished and challenged. How can anybody write 60 different volumes about God? How is that even possible? And Prabhupada wrote what his reply was. He says, it's only 60 volumes because in this earthly realm, our brains are puny. He used that word, puny brains. He said on celestial worlds, they are studying tens of thousands of volumes of Srimad Bhagavatam. I'll never forget when I first read that. And I began to understand that there's such vast differences between different living beings within this universe. So on that magnitude, we are puny, which makes it all the more overwhelming that the Lord would appear, would incarnate and appear in this earthly realm with the puny humans and display his human-like pastimes and his intimate pastimes. And then when he combined Radha and Krishna into one form, the ultimate beauty, the ultimate form of beauty and love is Radha within Krishna. The word infinite is used, I think, sometimes spuriously, because we have no ability to really contemplate what does infinite mean? I mean, if I see someone who's handsome or attractive, I suppose I could think, what if there was a person 10 times more attractive? I might be able to imagine that. 100 times more attractive is now reaching my limit. The idea that someone could be 1,000 times more beautiful than the most beautiful human living today, that's beyond us. That is beyond our puny brain. 1,000 times more beautiful than a human body. And Radha and Krishna, we're talking infinite beauty. We have no basis at all with our senses and our mind and our intelligence to stretch to that conception. It's impossible by our strength to imagine, no matter what we see in this world, and if we were the most empowered poet or artist, it would, whatever we express would fall so short of infinite beauty. Whatever we observe in the way humans feel affection for each other, infinite affection, infinite love. I mean, the word infinite is something we're trying to understand as we study the Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. We are trying to, and it almost seems the task is impossible. How can the infinite fit into something that is finite? By material calculation, obviously it cannot. So how can a person's finite mind and senses grasp that which is infinite? Impossible. Impossible. And yet, as you go through this chapter especially, you're going to read how to answer these fundamental questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What is this place? What is its purpose? One has to approach a bona fide spiritual master to understand the infinite and the will of the Supreme with finite mind sense. We have to approach a self-realized, bona fide spiritual master. And the amazing thing in this chapter that we're going to learn is that when Brahma is the first embodied being, there's no spiritual master to approach. We unbelievably fortunate souls are approaching a bona fide, empowered, pure spiritual master who can reveal the infinite to finite beings. So Krishna himself had to become his spiritual master. And thus the infinite made himself enter into the heart of a finite living entity. That in itself, if you just go somewhere and reflect while you're chanting your rounds or just reading and think, if you just have some quiet time to think, the conception of the infinite, unlimited God with all of his powers, opulences, potencies, enters into something that is not infinite. The fact that he can do that is the beginning of understanding of the descending process of realization, of acquiring knowledge. There are two processes: the empiric, speculative process and the descending process. And as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, if you take an unlimited number of jnanis, brilliant, intelligent beings trying so hard to study these questions, maybe one will ultimately become liberated from the material nature that restricts him. Maybe one can become liberated. And if somehow or other there were millions and millions at one time of such liberated beings, which is we can't imagine, especially in Kali Yuga. If there were millions and millions of such liberated beings, hardly one of them can actually understand the truth about God. So we can understand the magnitudes of this. We are puny-brained, embodied in a human form on earth. But because the living being is described as a part of God, particle of God, the spiritual particle, the soul, has the ability to have a certain percentage of knowledge and a certain percentage of spiritual qualities and beauty and experiences. I think, what is it, up to, I can't remember the exact percent, maybe up to 75%, let's just say, of God. Some percentage is the full capacity of a jiva as a part of the Supreme. A particle of water has the same constitutional chemical makeup as the ocean of water. So you would think, well, there's equality there. And thus the Mayavadi philosophy is formed, that we can become one with the ocean. A drop can become one with the ocean and thus be equal. But we are dealing with inconceivable concepts here. We are a particle of God, and if we were to merge into God, we still would not be equal. Maybe up to a certain percentage only. So, this is just my reflection on seeing this translation of Lord Brahma in his ignorance. Just the word ignorance applied to Lord Brahma is astonishing to us. Lord Brahma, in his ignorance, contemplated, who am I that am situated on top of this lotus? Wherefrom has it sprouted? There must be something downwards, and that from which this lotus has grown must be within the water. So these are his questions. First, being in Jiva, living being embodied in this universe. Now, this brings up another interesting point. The Vedic science and material science, material science has concluded what the Vedic science teaches in a conceptual way, that everything that is alive, everything, comes from an original life force, a living being, has an original ancestor. Conceptually, yes, that's, from every angle of vision, that is logical conclusion, as well as the revealed truth of the Vedas. But it is astonishing that modern science, with all their advancements, has somehow concluded that the original ancestor of us is some type of single cell with no consciousness, no intelligence, no desires, and somehow life grows out of a cell that in and of itself is just material energy combined in a certain way. One single invisible cell. This was their conclusion when they began developing their theories on the origin of life. We contrast that with the Vedic truth that the origin of life comes from the most advanced, most sentient, most intelligent, fully developed ancestor. That's the origin of all the lower forms of life. Not that a cell is the origin of all the higher forms of life. That is the great difference between, in our age, the mental speculations versus revealed truth. They can't come to this conclusion without accepting that the universe has a purpose and a designer. And because they're fashioning their teachings to try to explain life and the origin of species and planets and the universe, the cosmos, without any design and without any purpose, because they are filtering anything else out and trying to force their theories to fit into that paradigm, they will never, ever, ever, ever be able to explain the truths about where life comes from, where the universe comes from. They have studied that the universe has vast laws that seem to be constants. So they call them constants, laws of nature. I'm not going to read it, but I brought a book, a conversation with Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj, and one of the great microbiologists, scientists in America who believed in God. And they were having amazing conversations. And So Bhakti Swarupa Maharaj starts listing all of these constants, these laws of material nature that science has been able to detect. The law behind electricity, the law behind gravity, the law behind, there's a list of about 30 different constants that he just rattles off because he's very smart. And it leads to this question. If there are these constants, these laws, well, laws imply a lawmaker. If you're starting with an inert particle of matter, I don't even know how they describe it anymore. When I was young in school, they described it as a singularity. They may have new theories now. But when you're starting with that, how does, out of that, laws, constants, apply, form, without which planets would not float, atmospheres would not be able to accommodate life. Everything points to a design, not just random principles of material nature acting randomly for incountable trillions of years until they finally just happen to form into a perfect machine by itself. This is their proposition. This is the proposition of modern scientific teaching. And from the youngest age to the highest postgraduate studies, this is being taught to every human. That, and I don't want to simplify because they're very complex how they explain it, but the idea that complicated machines just form themselves, given enough billions of years, is their proposition. Where has anyone ever seen that happen? It might have made sense 200 years ago when they were first postulating their theories of evolution, of origin of life, but in the last 70 years, they have developed technologies that enable humans to look inside a single cell within a human body. Look inside. What they have found inside one cell is vast, complex machinery. Never was imagined until they had these instruments to peer into a cell. Could they ever have imagined the vast complexity? It's so complex that they coined the phrase, some who were open-minded, coined the phrase irreducible complexity. Why irreducible? Because you take one part of the machine out, the machine doesn't work the way it's supposed to. And the machine has millions of parts inside a cell. So how could those millions of different parts bond and connect in a way that the machine works when even if one item of that machine is removed, it doesn't work the way it's supposed to. It stops working. That's called irreducible complexity. They don't have an explanation of how that machinery inside a cell could have formed. They truly do not. It is a mystery. They give you the post-data check that one day we will understand these mysteries. But their proposition is not logical. It's a filtered message because they want people to believe that there's no one that we're accountable to. There's no God. There is no designer, which implies there is no purpose other than what we want to assign as a purpose for life. And thus we have a world of exploitation, because everyone has invented their own purpose. And since inevitably that purpose involves control over the material nature, control over something, whether it be land or family or wealth or whatever, it is a world of exploitation. That's the logical result of a purposeless universe. And the more they teach this, the more degraded civilization becomes. Life without a designer means there is no purpose. So this is the contrast between the Srimad Bhagavatam science of origins of the universe and the mundane mental speculators' so-called science. A single inner unconscious cell, and all life came out of that, given billions of years and random mutations and accidents, versus the most advanced being whose lifespan is trillions of years and whose capacities are trillions of years greater than ours as an engineer. Which is more logical when we look at the machinery of life, or the machinery of even just our solar system, the limited part of the world that we can see? So everyone who reaches the human form of life is meant to ask these questions. It began with the original being in the universe asking the same questions. We're all meant to ask these questions as humans. But the only way to get the real answers, since the designer himself is infinite, unlimited, possessing inconceivable potencies, since, as we said earlier, that cannot fit into a finite mind, the only true way to really understand life and the universe and its origins and its purpose is by approaching a self-realized, bona fide spiritual master who himself has seen the truths and can thus empower all of us with a process through which understanding will awaken. The potential for understanding all of this is in every soul. But the awakening of that understanding is not actually under our discretionary power. The awakening of understanding, of real intelligence, is a gift. And as we read that Krishna himself, the infinite being, entered into the heart of a living being in this universe, and then does that with every living being. The infinite is inside us. The Lord, in his Paramatma Supersoul feature, by following the path given by a bona fide spiritual master of how to be devoted to that being, as he sees that endeavor on our part, even though we're so puny, he begins from within, as we just chanting 16 rounds, he sees that endeavor, and from within, the Lord begins to awaken true knowledge, give us true realizations. It's not from our power that we get this knowledge. It's from our practicing bhakti yoga and our vow to chant 16 rounds that this knowledge can awaken within us. So let me just quickly read this. It's like 6-line purport, and then we'll take some reflections and questions. The subject matter of the speculations of Brahma in the beginning regarding the creation of the cosmic manifestation is still a subject matter for mental speculators. The most intelligent man is he who tries to find the cause of his personal existence and that of the whole cosmic creation, and thus tries to find the ultimate cause. If his attempt is properly executed with penances and perseverances, it is sure to be crowned with success. So here we are reading of the first most developed original embodied being in this universe with intelligence and powers that are going to be awakening in him that are so vast that we can't even imagine them. Just as, again, the magnitude of his life is beyond our calculation, so the magnitude of his powers are going to be beyond our imagination. But it's so logical that that would be the first engineer of the universe and not a mindless cell. So, any questions or reflections, please? Yes. What is your name? Dr. Kyle.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for giving class.
Hare
I very much appreciate you. One thing that came to my mind, how you were speaking about, wow, Brahma's ignorance, like how that's like such a far out concept. But then I was thinking more into it. Does that mean that every spiritual path begins with ignorance?
Every spiritual path begins with what?
Ignorance, as in like we all start from ignorance, but that's like the first stepping stone.
Well,
in spiritual.
The idea of everyone on every path and what they start with, it'll be described in the Srimad Bhagavatam that the material bodies are designed to accommodate the living being more or less from where he left off. Even materially, if we live our life in a completely self-serving, exploitative, almost animal-like way, nature will then award us to begin our next life. We will begin with animal body instincts and propensities. So someone on a spiritual path, it may be in this lifetime what appears to be the beginning for them. They might have been on spiritual paths in past lives. So it's impossible to compare each person as a bhakta's beginning the same as anyone else. A mundane example, if you ever go into a gym, there are people who are more developed or less developed, stronger, less strong, more endurance, less endurance. And everyone who ever teaches a person entering a gym will tell you, don't look at anybody else. Don't compare yourself to anybody else. Just concentrate on where you're beginning from. Because everyone begins from a different level based on the fact that the soul can never die. It's the consciousness was doing something before this body since the beginning of time. So who can say what we have done that leads us to be sitting in this room today? But you have to think in terms of the vastness of life in the universe, of time, inconceivable time. This is a great realization to look at yourself not just in terms of 60 or 80 years of this human body. The truth is much, much, much greater than that about who we are.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Thinking you were just mentioning about the chanting the 16 rounds, how Krishna then starts to purify us from within. So I was just thinking about what are the roles then that Prabhupada's books play in our spiritual advancement, and how we should view that.
The vows we all take as devotees in this line is not just to chant 16 rounds, not just to follow 4 regulative principles, but here, in addition to our own japa, transcendental sound vibrations, and study the message in those vibrations. And that's what Prabhupada was sent into this universe to bring about. The message, the timeless original message of the Vedas, as we are reading, was inside that lotus at the very beginning. Prabhupada was sent, it's lost, at least in our realm, and Prabhupada was sent by his guru, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, to take this message to the rest of the world, to the Western world, to the English-speaking world, just take it everywhere. And thus he was empowered to write. These books are his voice. They're spoken sound vibrations. And when we read them, that spiritual sound is penetrating our consciousness, is purifying our consciousness as much as chanting our rounds purifies our consciousness. It is divine sound that Prabhupada uttered. He once told us that he has to concentrate so deeply in the early morning hours when everyone around him is sleeping. He has to concentrate so deeply because he's hearing Krishna dictate to him. He has to meditate in that way to bring his sound into the form of these books. This is divine sound. So that's the role of Prabhupada's books. When we were publishing Prabhupada's books, I asked him, especially in one of our marathons, I said, what category of devotional service are we engaged in, we who are working on producing your books, whether it be the typesetting or the editing or the composing or creating indexes or the artwork, and the photography, what category are we all engaged in when we do this? And Prabhupada said, you're engaged in deity worship. And what does that tell us his books are? Deities. Non-different from God himself. He told us when we work on publishing his books, we're engaged in that type of devotional service. And then he added, when you take the finished books and distribute them to others, that category of devotional service is called Shravanam Kirtanam. Book distribution is in that category of bhakti, of devotional service. So some of us have the fortune of being the worshippers of deities. Some of us have the fortune of being great kirtaniyas through book distribution. The ultimate kirtaniya is book distribution. Any other questions or reflections? By the way, this soul over here, if I didn't have my restriction from my hip, I'd fall on the ground and scoop dust on my head from him. I just have to say that by seeing him in person. I see him every day on YouTube, but I just can't speak enough about what he is doing. In his way, he is as great a book distributor as any of us, in his way. And So many devotees who became great book distributors, when they were asked, how did you first come to Krishna consciousness? So many, this is my story, I know it's Indradyumna's story, different devotees have the same story. They were just walking on the streets where they lived. They heard the kartals and something became irresistibly attractive, and they followed the sound until they met the kirtan party. For myself, that is how I came to Krishna consciousness. This great soul, who, by the way, carves all the Prabhupada Murtis, Lochan, was a temple president in the city where I was going to school, in Portland, and he had a small kirtan party. And one day I was just walking to my campus, and I heard those kartals, and I followed them it was an irresistible attraction I felt. I had no resistance to it. It just pulled me to the kirtan. So that's the origin of so many book distributors in our movement. So we thank you. We thank you. So,
Yeah.
yes,
Hare Krishna,
last
Prabhu.
question or comment.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving class. It's so enlivening. I think that today I was a little tired, but you're giving class and just your directness just woke me up
Could you just speak a little slower so I can hear?
a little slower. I see, but your class is very enlivening. I think especially one point when you're talking about how Krishna reciprocates with our endeavors. That's something that's been on my mind for a while. So I wanted to ask, how does Krishna reciprocate with our endeavor and our desire to be?
I'll tell you what Srila Prabhupada often spoke as an answer to that question. He would quote from his own Bhagavad Gita, from the words of Krishna himself. I'm not going to say the Sanskrit, but I'm going to give you the English. For those who are devoted and worship me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. There are unlimited realizations that await every one of us to get glimpses deeper and deeper of the unlimited, inconceivable beauty of God, pastimes of God, qualities of God, powers of God. That understanding is given to those who are devoted and worship me with love. That's how Krishna reciprocates. Believe me, it's way beyond our limited, puny mind, intelligence, sensory perception. It's a gift. Krishna awakens it inside of us, in our consciousness. You will see things that no one else sees eventually. You will feel things that no one else is feeling eventually. That's how Krishna gifts this knowledge, these realizations by which you come to him. How else can anyone who is finite approach a being who is infinite? He has to let you. He has to give you the ability to come to him, and he does. That's how Prabhupada answered that question. Guaranteed. Krishna will give you that knowledge by which you can come to him. Thank you very much for this opportunity to try to say a few words about how Prabhupada presented Krishna consciousness as the ultimate science. Hare Krishna. Namo Vishnu Padaya, Krishna Krishna. Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Chitani Namaste. Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Hare Krishna.